industry rebel who blurred the lines between rock and country.
Could you really like Bill Monroe and like the Beatles? Of course you could.
Well, I'll give you love.
The man who redefined the Nashville sound and the honky-tonks of California. And he did it by being himself.
All you gotta do is act natural.
The life and times of Buck Owens. Tonight, 8 Eastern on TNN, the Nashville Network. Next on TNN. She's the matriarch of the Ewing family.
We've got to hope for the best, Lucy.
Ruling with iron will.
Get me the shotgun out of the hall closet.
In country music empire and sound. The life and times of Buck Owens. Next on TNN.
I've got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see. I won't be much when you get through with me. Well, I'm a-losing weight and I'm turning mighty pale. Looks like I've got a tiger by the tail.
I've got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see. And that's probably what it was when Buck's music took off. It was that. And it was a whirlwind. Buck's a whirlwind.
They're gonna put me in the movies. Yeah, they're gonna make a big star out of me.
Buck did come through cutting like a knife, just like Elvis did. You know what I'm saying? In his own way, he established a great sound.
Love's gonna live dear. Love's gonna live dear. Love's gonna live dear again.
I mean, I can't imagine anybody hearing Buck's records and not just being completely transported by it.
Love's gonna live dear again.
It's just so confident, it's just so there. It's sort of like they're perfect records.
Buck Owens, the man with the honky-tonk sound and the country smile, owned the country music charts for most of the 1960s, knocking out 18 #1 hits between 1963 and 1969. But Buck's success was more than a matter of record sales. At a time when country music was going through an identity crisis, Buck kept it true to its honky-tonk roots, and he did so as an outsider from Bakersfield, California.
Buck Owens, from about 1958 to about 1968 or 9, was the quintessential proponent of honky-tonk music, took it to its zenith.
Country was going through I would say, almost cosmopolitan kind of a sound with strings, and things were a lot more lush, and Buck came along, and it was twangy electric guitars and not a lot of bass and a little bit of kick in it, and it was really way ahead of its time.
I would say that at a time when country music was really trying to dress up and get itself accepted. The Nashville people were really trying to get past the hay bales. Old Buck Owens was out there in Bakersfield just being cool.
Being cool and working like a man possessed. A 9th grade dropout from a dirt-poor family, Buck's artistry was matched by his hunger to succeed and his business savvy and nerve. Along with the Bakersfield sound, he built a Bakersfield empire that put him in complete control of his work and made him one of country music's wealthiest men.
I don't know that there's any other artist out there that understands the game of country music and the business of country music as well as he does.
Buck took himself and made himself an industry. And now this town's full of hundreds of guys with record deals all wanting to be an industry. They're all trying to do what Buck did,
Buckaroo.
Buck Owens still hangs out in Bakersfield, or Buckersfield as it is often called, mostly at the Crystal Palace, an upscale honky-tonk he built last year with $7 million of his own dollars. The club is adorned with hundreds of photos of his life and career, and a sports car designed for Elvis inlaid behind the bar. It's a long way from Buck's Dust Bowl roots in the farming town of Sherman, Texas, where he was born, Alvis Edgar Owens, on August 12, 1929. The son of sharecroppers, Buck was working the fields with his parents by the time he could walk.
I remember the times were tough. I remember being cold. One thing I always said when I was a kid, when I grow up, I ain't going to be cold, and I ain't going to be hungry, and I ain't going to be poor.
At the age of 4, young Alvis nicknamed himself Buck, in honor of the family mule. 4 years later, Buck and his family joined the great wave of Okies who left the Dust Bowl in search of work out west. The family of 10 squeezed into a Ford sedan and made it as far as Mesa, Arizona, when their car and money gave out. For the next few years, they worked as fruit gypsies, chasing the crops in California's San Joaquin Valley.
Every year, you know, we'd come out of school 2 weeks early. My dad would, and then we'd come over here from Arizona. We'd go through the potatoes and tomatoes and Tracy, and we would do the grapes and all these things, the peaches up in Modesto. And then we'd do some cotton, and we'd start back to school 2 weeks late. We stayed mostly in labor camps, and there'd be some guy playing a guitar, another guy'd come down with a fiddle, and that happened almost every evening. You know, there was guys around, and they played, I guess, to relieve a little pressure. I thought it was real good, but and I'd sit around and I'd watch what they did and how they did it, and it was a great environment for me.
When he was 13, Buck dropped out of school to work full-time hauling fruit. His parents gave him a mandolin for Christmas that year, and he spent all his spare time teaching himself to play. By the time he was 15, he was playing in honky-tonks around Phoenix for $3 a night. It wasn't much, but getting paid for playing music did wonders for his ambition and drive.
I want a big fat mama to tell my troubles to. I want a big fat mama, 'cause a little skinny gal won't do. I want a big fat mama to tell my troubles to. You know, when I realized that it was cool in there and I could make as much playing in one of those honky-tonks as I could out there in that hot field all day, I got to picking harder.
Buck picked his way into a group called Max Skillet Liquors, which played weekly radio concerts from a gas station bandstand and featured a singer named Bonnie Campbell. Buck and Bonnie married on January 13, 1948. 3 years later, Buck was a family man with 2 kids and a burning desire to put as big a distance as possible between himself and the poverty of his past. He figured music was his best chance, and that he'd have a better shot in a town that he picked cotton in as a kid. A town packed with honky-tonks and brimming with Okies. A town called Bakersfield. The Life and Times of Buck Owens returns in a moment on TNN.
We're rolling back.
The Life and Times of Buck Owens continues on TNN.
I've spent 1,000 miles of coming. I've worn blisters on my heels, trying to find me something better on the streets of Bakersfield.
In 1951, the streets of Bakersfield were full of people like Buck Owens, Dust Bowl escapees who worked the oil fields and produce farms by day and crammed the city's plentiful honky-tonks by night. Buck quickly landed a job at the Blackboard, one of Bakersfield's wilder clubs, where he played guitar and sang for the house band, Bill Woods and the Orange Blossom Playboys. Buck would play here 7 nights a week for the next 7 years, honing his skills before a pent-up roughneck crowd that demanded music it could move to and feel.
Spent a night there in the can.
A real good honky-tonk. The dance floor stayed full. And the real good ones, like the Wizards, who could stand up there and keep all of that energy moving, they were the guys like George Jones and Buck Owens that, you know, became honky-tonk legends.
Buck thrived in Bakersfield. He taught himself to play saxophone and drums, commuted to Los Angeles for day jobs as a studio musician, and moonlighted on guitar for Tommy Collins, at the time Bakersfield's biggest star. It was with Collins that Buck made his first trip to the mecca of all aspiring country artists, Nashville. It was a sweet experience for Buck, who had his picture taken with Eddie Arnold and Chet Atkins. But it was also an eye-opener. Buck was stunned by Nashville's heavy-handed ways. The Grand Ole Opry wouldn't let Collins' band use a full set of drums or control how loud they played.
That was quite strange for me. Especially they didn't allow you to have your own amplifier. You jacked it in the house system, and they regulated it how they wanted to sound. I'd never played anywhere where I didn't have the volume control or I didn't have the tone control. But, you know, beside the point, I had played now in the Grand Ole Opry, and so that was something good for me. I had no... Nashville and I were still in love.
In love, but heading in different directions. Buck's ear was tuned to the rough vitality of Bakersfield, and he liked to play loud. In 1954, he became one of the first country artists to swap his Gibson Electric for a solid-body Fender Telecaster, the quintessential rock and roll guitar. When Elvis broke in 1956, Buck identified with the revved-up new sound.
When Buck first heard Elvis and rock and roll and all that exciting stuff out in California, you know, we were all aware of it just as soon as it happened. And we talked about it. And Buck, though, he liked that, you know, and I think he took some of that excitement.
Inspired by Elvis, Buck cut a rockabilly record in 1956 called Hot Dog. But the hostility to rock by country purists was so great that he put it out under a pseudonym.
Corky Jones was a name I invented to try to do a rockabilly record and don't get thrown out of the country music establishment. They thought of you as a traitor if you tried to cut a country record to where it might be played in the pop as well. And so I even tried a different name, Corky Jones, but it didn't hide anything.
A year later, Capitol Records signed Buck to a record deal. But they were afraid he sounded too country and made him put strings and a sugary choir on his first recordings.
It wasn't me, you know, and they said, well, you know, we got to have something that folks are going to like. So we ended up with a group of people singing doo-wahs on them.
The records bombed, and when Capitol asked Buck to record again, he insisted on doing it his way.
Well, I'll give you love that's above and beyond the call of love, and I'll never ever make you cry. Yes, I'll give you
Buck cut a series of up-tempo shuffles that featured fiddle and steel guitar. They sounded unmistakably country, but also modern and clean. Above and Beyond, Second Fiddle, and Under Your Spell Again were all top 40 hits that kicked off Buck's recording career. Inevitably, as Buck made a name for himself, Nashville beckoned. Buck appeared on Fair and Young's Country Style USA in 1960.
Buck, it's wonderful having you here on Country Style USA with us, good buddy.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Say, Farron.
But the more Buck saw of Nashville, the less he liked its musical direction or domineering style.
Well, the attitude was be a good boy and pat you on the head and feed you cornbread and you're going to be okay. But you got to do things within the rules, you know. And of course, you know, I never was very good at that. I always thought that they made soupy, syrupy, sweet music and sweet love songs and all that, and it bored me. And I was far more raw-edged to turn it on and play it and turn it up. You know, like I've often described it as a locomotive sound, just like a locomotive was going to come right through the building. You know, that's the way I felt it. That's the way I wanted it.
Buck decided to stay in Bakersfield, a seemingly crazy choice for someone as hungry as he was to succeed. Everyone said you couldn't cut a #1 country record outside of Nashville. Buck Owens was determined to prove them wrong. The Life and Times of Buck Owens returns in a moment on TNN.
No, I won't be afraid. I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me.
Buick LeSabre is built to keep you safe and secure. A comforting thought, especially for those who aren't even in the car.
Stand by me.
Just one of the boys. But what do you do when you're the only girl in a family with 5 brothers?
I just had to go find something that I could do better, and I did.
Spread your tiny wings and fly away.
And when school teacher becomes Grammy Award winner, important decisions have to be made.
This was not something I ever intended to do for a living.
The Life and Times of Anne Murray, Wednesday, May 14th at 8 Eastern on TNN, the Nashville Network.
The Life and Times of Buck Owens continues on TNN.
Well, the poor boy's chances for a pretty girl's glances are sometimes very few. Though I've got no money, if you'll be my honey, here's what I'll offer you. Well, I'll give you love that's above.
By 1960, Buck Owens was succeeding above and beyond everyone's expectations but his own. One reason for his success was Don Rich, a fiddle player and guitarist Buck discovered while hosting a TV show in Tacoma, Washington. Rich was only 16 years old at the time, a high school sophomore, but he could play and sing beautifully, and Buck immediately recognized a musical soulmate.
Together again, the gray skies are gone.
I was enthralled by Don Rich, who was Buck's harmony singer, and Buck will probably speak more reverently of Don Rich than maybe any man that he's ever known.
The love that I knew is living again.
I got to do a TV show with Buck a few years ago, and he says, well, do you want to sing? And I said, just Don's part. That's all I want to do is just get to be Don for a day.
We're together again.
And all of a sudden, he had this buddy that was playing fiddle and good-looking guy and singing a great harmony behind him, you know. And Don was pretty much, I would say, a star along with a star.
Don Rich, I always thought got inside my mind. And if you listen to some of the records, people think it's me. It's not me, it's him. I mean, that's how good he was. He and I had to, somewhere in another life, have played music together somewhere.
Another important change for Buck came in 1962, when he decided to form his own band, the Buckaroos. Merle Haggard, who briefly played bass for Buck, suggested the name.
Open up your heart and let my love come in.
He respected those guys that played with him. It wasn't his backup band. They were every bit as big a part of his sound as anything else.
Not only was I a fan of Buck Owens, the singer and the songwriter, and the records he made, the songs, I was a fan of Don Rich, and I was a fan of Willie Cantu, the drummer, Doyle Holly, the bass player, and almost like a rock band, you know, the way you get into individuals in a rock band.
Sensing his chance, Buck pushed himself and the Buckaroos. He toured relentlessly, playing over 300 cities a year and doing everything he could think of to build a national following.
Buck did work very hard. Probably, I'd never thought of it like that, but probably as hard as anybody I've ever known. He enlisted his own family, like his sister and his mom and everybody, you know, and to write to these DJs and to get that record played and to thank them. And old Buck Owens, really, he exploited the fan club thing in country music first and the most by keeping in touch with these fan club presidents. And every town we go to, there'd be one, you know. Buck would give her a hug.
You got to remember, not many people was poor as we were. I mean, you know, we were very, very poor. And so here's an opportunity. And, you know, I'm so afraid that I got to get it right now, all of it, as quick as I can, before somebody might reach out there and snatch it away.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me. We'll make a film about a man that's sad and lonely. And all they gotta do is act naturally. Well, I'll bet you I'm gonna be a big star. I might win an Oscar, you can't never tell.
In 1963, the years of intense work paid off. Act Naturally became Buck Owens' first #1 record, kicking off one of the great hot streaks in the history of country music.
Love's gonna live here again.
14 of the 15 records Buck Owens released between 1963 and 1967 went to #1. Love's Gonna Live Here resided at the top for 16 weeks. A throwaway called Buckaroo became the first instrumental to top the country charts.
How hot was he? You know how hot white heat is? He was hot as white heat. And all the years at the blackboard, and all the years in the club, and developing his own thing. You know, it was payday. It was time to cash in. And that's what happened.
To this day, Buck likes to talk about his chart milestones, especially with up-and-coming country stars.
I remember when I was in his office, he showed me a Billboard chart. He had 2 songs, #1 and #2. The next week, they were flip-flopped. And then the next week, they flip-flopped again, 1 and 2. And he showed it to me, and he said, look at there, boy. That won't ever happen again.
No more loneliness.
But Buck Owens and the Buckaroos were not just a group that could sell records. They were also an electrifying live band. And the image of Buck and Don playing twin Telecasters was one of the most riveting of its time.
One time at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, Don and Buck started playing twin electric Fender guitars at the same time. Musicians, other stars on the show, ran to the back of the stage to listen to it. It was, you know, they talk about magic. That's what it was.
You know, I used to wonder sometimes what people must have thought. Where this guy's doing drifting along with the tumbleweed, nice and soft, and all of a sudden here comes 2 guys out here with two Telecasters with the things turned way up on the high end, and their faces, you know, they're sitting on the front row and they look like we're playing so loud and so fast and so hard. Their faces are all kind of pulled back, You know, and I've often wondered what a shock that must have been to some people sitting on the front row waiting for somebody to sing Tumbling Tumbleweeds.
As it turned out, Buck's Telecaster-driven sound was more successful than Nashville's easy listening forays.
I was honest first and commercial second. Because every time I tried to be commercial and then honest, it didn't work out.
Buck Owens crossed over by doing exactly what Buck Owens and the Buckaroos did, and that's just play hardcore, honky-tonk, twanging music. And, you know, the rest of the world found it.
The rest of the world, including a group from Liverpool. The Beatles were big Buck Owens fans. They had Capitol Records rush them his albums as soon as they were pressed, and they covered Act Naturally in 1965. But the Fab Four were a controversial group in some country circles, and true country artists weren't supposed to like them. Buck liked them.
Oh, man, I thought, my land, good Lord, listen, that's the Beatles singing Act Naturally. I thought, to have the Beatles do it was the ultimate. You can't imagine that feeling. You know, I can't even tell you about that feeling. It's a feeling all unto itself and probably only unto me, you know. I had all the Beatles albums long from when they first came along. I'd been a Beatles fan. Don Rich and I had Beatles fans. I thought Bill Monroe was wonderful, you know, but also I thought the Beatles were. And I think that was kind of a little different than what. Could you really like Bill Monroe and like the Beatles? Of course you could. You weren't supposed to, maybe sometime, but oh, it was great. We had wigs, although I didn't wear one. The other four boys wore wigs, and then we'd have a lot of fun with it. You know, they'd throw the wigs down, and Don Rich would shoot one of them with this big old cap and pistol. Doing that at Carnegie Hall was the only kind of guy said, if you ever come back, would you please leave the pistol? We will.
The life and times of Buck Owens returns in a moment on TNN.
When your livelihood depends on the quality of your plants, your choice of plant food really matters.
And I use a lot of Miracle-Gro to keep my customers and their plants very happy.
When you're in the nursery business, you can't afford to use anything but the best. That's Miracle-Gro.
I use Miracle-Gro, and I recommend it to all of my customers.
Say, if professional growers depend on Miracle-Gro, shouldn't you? Give all your new plants a better start in life with Miracle-Gro Quick Start. It's like life insurance for your plant.
Instituted Family Fare, and it shows everywhere you look. Our fresh produce is just the beginning. At Family Fare, we have fresh ideas on everything, from handles on our paper bags to the smile on every face. And now, our freshness shows at 2 new stores. Visit our new Granville and Kentwood locations or any other Family Fare and see the difference. Family Fare, our freshness shows.
When Cooper Tire asked me to be their spokesman,
When I think of Buckaroo music, I always think of... Well, I discovered Buck Owens when I was like 7 years old. That twanging Telecaster sound, it went right inside my heart immediately and lived there, and it has ever since. Tiger by the Tail was the first song I ever learned to play. The first song. I had my first band when I was just a kid. I mean, like 9 years old. One of the set lists that I found, and I gave it to Buck, it said, Tiger by the Tail, in parentheses, I'd made myself a note, act like Buck Owens.
Got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see. I won't be much when you get through with me.
Buck recorded Tiger by the Tail in 1964 at the height of his popularity. The song was a takeoff on a Tiger in Your Tank ad campaign for Esso Gas. It became Buck's biggest hit and signature song, crossing over to the pop charts and giving him a second nickname. Curiously, just as Buck was breaking through on the pop charts, he took out a full-page ad in a Nashville paper, pledging to record nothing but real country songs.
A lot of places he would go, people say, yeah, Buck, you'll be playing that rock and roll the next thing you know. And he was trying to send a message to the fans to assure them that he was going to play country music.
I went and got a copy of that pledge, and we nailed it in the front of that bus, you know? and we kind of lived by it. We kind of thought it was a cool pledge to live by. I will play no song that isn't a country song. And then turn right around and play Johnny Be Good. I like that kind of pledge. Where I come from, that's a country song.
What exactly did Buck mean by a country song? The same month that he took the pledge, Buck recorded Memphis by rock and roll pioneer Chuck Berry. Later, he scored a #1 country hit with Berry's rock anthem, Johnny Be Good.
Way down in Louisiana, back in New Orleans, you know, they're talking about a little boy that plays the guitar and he waves to the locomotive guy. His mama saying someday your name's gonna be up in lights. That's a country song to me. If Chuck Berry recorded it, he's black, so they say, well, it's rock and roll. But to me, you know, if he'd have been white, he'd have been a hillbilly. He'd have been a country guy like me. I wanted the American public to know I was country. I am country. I ain't never been anything but. But it doesn't mean that I can't love other kinds of music. Yeah.
By the mid-1960s, Buck Owens was enjoying the fruits of his success.
Well, I spend a lot of time at my ranch. I love cattle and I love horses and outside life.
A child of the Dust Bowl, Buck was now a gentleman rancher, presiding over a large spread outside Bakersfield with his second wife, Phyllis. Buck was also developing into an astute businessman. He bought the first of several radio stations, launched a music publishing company, and built his own state-of-the-art recording studio, single-handedly turning Bakersfield into an independent country music capital.
Hi, everybody. I'm Buck Owens. Welcome to our show.
Buck also threw himself into a new arena, television, producing and starring in a syndicated series called Buck Owens Ranch.
You know, when I was a kid, we never missed the Buck Owens show. I saw one of those episodes recently on some program, and was just blown away by the accuracy of the singing. You could have recorded those for an album, what they did on his show. And, you know, and that's difficult to do.
Buck showcased some early music videos on the Ranch show, including one he recorded in the streets of New York City.
I wouldn't live in New York City if they gave me the whole dang town. Talk about a bummer, it's the biggest one around.
Sodom and Gomorrah, tame to what I found. I wouldn't live in New York City if they gave me the whole damn town.
Buck didn't mind visiting New York City, however, especially when he was asked to perform in the most prestigious honky-tonk of them all, Carnegie Hall.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me.
In 1968, Buck played in a very different kind of concert hall for a very different kind of crowd.
I had an old poster that burned up in a fire a couple of years ago, sadly. It was an original Fillmore West show poster where Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, Buck the Tiger Owens, it said, would be appearing at the Fillmore West. I think probably 1967, like the height of the summer of love. I mean, you talk about juxtaposing culture. I mean, that was it, but not really.
I was mystified and sometimes mortified, you know. I thought, these guys, now, wait a minute, what are we doing here? I felt like I was out of place at the time, but the more we got into the evening, you know, the better it was for us. I thought, yeah, this ain't too bad. These kids, they know what they like. It's the first place I ever learned that they didn't want halfway stuff. Don't apologize. They wanted, when they wanted country, they wanted stone country. And then I knew that's why they had me there, to be myself.
Many people thought Buck stopped being himself when he decided to host another TV show. This one, a primetime network series that promised to make him a mainstream star. Hee Haw was an enormous success. But when Buck traded in his nudie suit and Telecaster for a pair of backward overalls and a hayseed smile, he lost some of his truest fans.
I have to say openly, when Buck joined up the Hee Haw cast, I was mad. You know, and in some ways I never got over it. I thought, oh, he sold out, you know. And because before he was that entity outside of it all, and then he went and joined the mainstream.
You know, they paid me $400,000 a year for 17 years, and that makes them really nice people to me, you know. Well, the bad side, of course, was always, how do you take a guy that wears his overalls backwards up there on this show with all these pretty girls and all these seemingly dumb guys? How do you take a guy serious when he wants to sing a song like, "Together again, my tears have stopped falling, long, lonely nights are now at an end." You sing songs like that. I don't think they believed me after that.
The Life and Times of Buck Owens returns in a moment on TNN.
If there's a chance of a baby in your future, the B vitamin folic acid is critical before pregnancy. Folic acid may help reduce the risk of birth defects.
Continues on TNN.
This guitar was given to me by Buck Owens to use. He said for my lifetime. So that's about all I needed for it, really. It belonged to Don Rich. This is the guitar. Buck had one, Don had one, identical guitars. This guitar played at Buckaroo, Tiger by the Tail, Sam's Place, Act Naturally, Love's Gonna Live Here, you know, all the hits. You play it and you go, that's it. That's why I learned to play the guitar. That's the sound.
On July 17, 1974, Don Rich was killed when he crashed his motorcycle on California's curving coastal highway. Don's death brought Buck Owens' charmed musical ride to an end and put Buck in a tailspin that lasted for years.
After I lost Don, you know, it was tough after that. I never really got it together. It's like part of you died. Part of you died. Are you ever going to be able to get that part going again? And I always hoped I would, but I never did. Wasn't possible, which I didn't know at that time.
If you knew the two of them and you saw them together, you would understand they had a bond, you know, of soulmates. And so, you know, going out and singing the same 20 songs every night, and they hand you a big check or a handful of money after you're already a millionaire, and, you know, and you got all the toys in the world you wanted and everything, but you've lost your buddy. And, man, here comes the harmony part. Somebody else is singing it. And I mean, I can just make a lot of sad country songs out of that situation.
I've got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see.
Buck's depression was later diagnosed as an extended nervous breakdown. He continued to perform and record throughout the 70s, but with an emptiness that finally prompted him to retire in 1980 at the age of 50. For the next 6 years, Hee Haw was Buck Owens' only calling card, and his cornball persona made it hard to remember what a fierce and influential artist he had been. Dwight Yoakam had not forgotten, and in 1987, he paid a surprise visit to a man he regarded as his mentor.
I was bored. I was lethargic. I'd played all the tennis and all the golf and all the things I could. So Dwight says, my band and I know a bunch of your songs. Why don't you sing some with me tonight on the stage? I thought about it about this long. And then I said, Dwight, I'd love to do that.
You don't know me, but you don't like me. Say you care less how I feel. But how many of you that sit and judge me ever walk the streets of Bakersfield?
Buck and Dwight decided to record together, and they cut an old Buck song, one loaded with personal meaning. Streets of Bakersfield shot to #1, the 21st chart topper of Buck's career.
Couldn't tell you how much I owe Dwight. I owe Dwight a lot. But Dwight was the guy that gave me another brief moment in the sun. And it's been a wonderful moment. I couldn't tell you, I couldn't put in words what that did for me.
With Dwight shining the spotlight, Buck returned to the stage.
Oh, the sun's gonna shine in my life once more. That's gonna lift here again.
He performed in Nashville in 1988, playing Don Rich's Silver Telecaster and healing old wounds. 8 years later, Nashville gave Buck a much-deserved award.
On behalf of the CMA, Buck, congratulations on being inducted as the newest member of the Hall of Fame.
Buck was really quite blown away, I think, when he got in the Country Music Hall of Fame a year or two ago. And he didn't think that would ever happen in his lifetime.
You know, I think that Nashville thought that this guy will go away. He'll shoot himself in the foot, keeps on talking, and he'll shoot himself in the head. And then we'll be rid of him. And I really think that's what they thought. But eventually, when they put me in the Hall of Fame, I was very honored, and I'm very honored today.
But probably not as moved as when a young woman approached him in Bakersfield that same year.
She looked at me and she said, I know you. Just in a soft kind of voice, and she had a little boy walking along in front of her. And all of a sudden, she reached over, put her arm around my neck, and kissed me on the cheek, and she said, and I love you. And walks on out. And I think that means, yes, she understands what I said. She understood it.
The life and times of Buck Owens returns in a moment on TNN.
Not again. Bully.
I was a 98-pound weakling. Then I called 1-800-8888-TEX for the free Texas Travel Guide. It's swell. With over 270 pages, just lifting the Texas Travel Guide gives my spindly arms a workout. Everywhere I go, I carry the entire state of Texas with me. From the canyons of Big Bend to the big city, to the world-famous Alamo. Fun times galore. And because I called 1-800-8888-TEX, I found the beaches where the people are friendly.
Howdy.
No more sand in the face for me.
For your free Texas travel guide, call 1-800-8888-TEX.
You know, I don't think I'd need a Ziploc brand freezer bag for everything. Would I?
You would.
Why can't I use that?
On TNN.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. It's you must go. And I must buy.
I'd kill to be able to sing like him. He's like a song machine. He's like this jukebox. You can drop any kind of song in, and it comes out sounding wonderful.
Together again. I just have stopped falling.
These days, Buck does most of his singing at the Crystal Palace, the dinner club honky-tonk he recently built in Bakersfield.
The Crystal Palace is no more than Buck's living room. It's a place where he can go be Buck Owens when he wants to be. It's a part of his empire. And, you know, Buckersfield, as I call it out there.
When it opened in 1996, Buck not only played and sang, he hit the dance floor with his third wife, Jennifer, whom he married in 1978, kindling memories of Bakersfield's honky-tonk glory years. But Buck's own memories dance to life when he sits back and noodles on his guitar.
Just a simple little guitar. Pretty soon you look around and you say, well, what time is it? And that's the first time you realize an hour and a half's passed. And it still works that way for me sometimes.
As it did when Buck first picked up a guitar as a Dust Bowl kid in Texas. All he wanted to do was get out of the cold. But along the way, Buck Owens forged a crucial link in country's honky-tonk tradition, and he did so by standing up to Nashville's easy listening ambitions and standing up for his own Bakersfield sound.
He came up with something really unique and different, his own style. I would think that anybody that does that has to have a sense of independence about them. They're not going to be influenced by record companies or trying to get a hit. Ultimately, you have to do it your own way.
I stand the same place I always stood, and that's if it's in your head and in your heart, I think you need to go ahead and do it. What you feel like you should be doing, do that. That's the way I did it.
Like all Americans, I like big things. Big prairies, big forests and mountains, big wheat fields, and everything.
Uptown Country Frank Olivier in his attempt to not set me on fire, plus the Kentucky Headhunters and newcomer Michael Peterson.
Prime Time Country, next on TNN, the Nashville Network.